We have a special guest returning from the Arthur Christmas podcast.
Hey, I'm Matt Sullivan.
Oh my God! We're doing this one too! We're talking about Avatar: Way of the Water, a movie quite literally 13 years in the making. Before we talk about our thoughts on the movie, I just kind of want to know, what kind of expectations did we have going into Avatar: The Way of Water? Matt, for you, I'm going to actually swap up the question a little bit. You had the fortune of working on the movie. This is a big Hollywood production. What does that kind of do to color your expectations for the movie? Do you just see it as, oh, that's a thing I work on? Do you get excited as like a fan at all? Or like, what's that like?
Yeah, so it was definitely an interesting one. The Avatar sequels in particular, just because, most productions that I'm a part of on them for about anywhere from like 3 months to 6 months, sometimes a little bit longer. And then within the next year, it's done and out the door. So with these movies, I knew that the timeline was going to be expanded a little bit on that. So I was on them for about a year and a half. I worked on 2 and 3. 3 doesn't have a name yet. It'll be announced at some point. But I think just the expansion of that timeline was like a little bit weird to adjust to, because I worked on them in 2017 and 2018. And at the time, it was supposed to be about a year out from the time that I left. And then it got pushed a couple times. And so I was like just sitting there waiting to see what those final shots were going to look like, because my department, I think it was called the sequencing team or the sequence team, but usually it would be called the previs department, because it was such a unique technological approach to filmmaking. It wasn't quite the same as the way that we would work on anything else. So that's why the department kind of had a different name. But I think my expectations going into working on it were, I guess, from the standpoint of just someone who had seen the film and been technically really impressed with what they were able to do in 2009. And I had rewatched it right before starting. I think the day before I went on set, I rewatched the entire film. And that was, in 2017, I was blown away by how well it still held up, just in terms of like the textures and the world building and everything. I was thinking that after a rewatch, I would really be noticing that almost 10 years had passed. But I was pleasantly surprised to see that everything felt like it really held up, aside from, some basic like lighting things that really improved over those 10 years. Like just global illumination really took a huge step forward in that time. So some of the stuff with like the eye reflections and, just like minor nerdy things that I was like, now I would think that looked like it needed a bit of work. But as a whole, I think that film holds up super well, even today. So I was kind of coming in from that standpoint as just, a fan who had watched the film, thought it was a good film, was really impressed by it in a lot of ways. And then I didn't really know what to expect, because I had never worked with James Cameron before, and I had never really worked that in depth on a live action set before. Most of the time I was like set adjacent, working on kind of like behind the scenes stuff where like you're occasionally on and off the set, but you're not playing like a huge role in the on-set production. Whereas in this production, it was literally like half the days I was at my computer animating, and then half the days I was sitting in like stadium seating at a computer overlooking the soundstage while there's like galloping horses with like mocap suits on, and like it was just kind of like a crazy production that I had never seen anything like. When I was there, it was still actually really early in production. I was one of the first sequence artists on the entire film, because leading up into that point, they were still working on the technology that would even be used to allow the artists to create. So I was actually sitting kind of in this bullpen where Richie Bainham, who is like I'm not sure what his current role or credit was. I'm guessing that it was probably like assistant director or visual effects supervisor for like the on-set productions or something. But he's kind of like James Cameron's right-hand man in terms of just being able to understand the wild complexities and physics of such a complicated production that's like so specific. And he had worked, actually, one of the things that he had told me he had worked on early in his career with Brad Bird was Iron Giant. Oh. He was one of the animators for Iron Giant when he was still pretty young. He was just doing like, I think he was doing the CG animation for the giant and like the detached hand that's like crawling stuff. He had been telling me about that stuff and it was like so cool. One of our direct supervisors is one of the creators of one of my favorite films of all time. So that was super cool. And so we're kind of in this bullpen. Richie's office was right there, along with some of the other production people. Our bullpen actually had a huge glass window right behind my head. So if I'm at my computer now, there's a massive glass window right behind me. And if I just stood up and turned around, it's looking down on a massive set, which was stage 6, I think. It was one of 2 main production stages that they were shooting more of the parkour stuff. And then while I was there, over the year and a half or so that I was there, they were in the process of building the underwater capture stage. So when I first got there, they literally had carpenters on that other tank stage, and they were building the structure for it. We would just walk in there every couple days to see the progress. That's just kind of how it goes. You take a lunch break, you just walk from one set to the next, because when it's such a big production, there's usually a lot of stuff going on at any given time. You know, you could have one team that's doing like performance capture for previs on one set, and then you have them doing like camera capture and like your first team, basically like your first director, and then you have second director and second unit. So first and second unit were usually doing different things, and so you'd kind of like wander from one stage to the next just during lunch break, check out what's going on here, what's going on there, see how the progress on the tank is going. And I just remember seeing that tank, like it was kind of like a time lapse in my mind over the course of that year and a half where it just came to life. And then by the time I left, they were actually like actively capturing footage underwater for all that stuff that I'm sure you guys saw. It was just such a different production than anything I had been a part of before. It was just super inspiring to be around such talented people and be part of such a cutting edge production that was just so different from the norm. And it was definitely one of the most difficult productions in terms of, I guess, specificity would be the name of the game. You know, with some productions, depending on the director, if they're a little bit lenient about the types of shots that they're looking for, it's a bit easier to pitch stuff, make suggestions. There's a bit more of a give and take. With Jim, the difference is that, you know, it's actually great. He knows exactly what he wants down to the pixel, and your job is to basically help him get there, right? It's super inspiring to see someone that takes such an attention to detail, even in terms of like one of the sequences that I was working on the most at the beginning of production was when I think the sequence was called Manifest Destiny. So there are some spoilers in here.
Yeah, audience, we're spoiling the shit out of Avatar 2.
Yeah, okay. So one of the sequences that I worked on very heavily right when I started was the Manifest Destiny sequence, which is when, I think it's the second scene in the movie. The first scene is kind of like getting those intimate moments with the family where you're seeing Nateum's birth and you're kind of seeing them learn how to hunt and just like understand the ways of the Pandoran rainforest and everything. And then the next sequence is a very hard cut. I think it's not actually a cut, but it feels like a cut because Neytiri just looks up and you see like this sparkle in the sky, and then it cuts into the Manifest Destiny spaceship just like piling down into the Earth or into Pandora. And so I was working on all of that sequence with like the spaceships coming down, all of the effects for the thrusters coming out of the spaceship. And then we had this huge conversation about, Jim was very set on, as the ship was coming down and the thrusters were first making contact with the ground, he wanted to feel like there was a torus-shaped like flux. He called it like the toroidal flux, which was basically like if you have intense propulsion going downwards, once it hits a flat ground plane, it has nowhere to go but out, and then it creates kind of like a Taurus effect. So if you were to blast a rocket flame downwards to the Earth, it creates like a donut-shaped vortex kind of, where all of the residual smoke is kind of caught up in this little like torus-shaped tornado. So he was super set on that, and that was kind of like the precipice for like the gigantic leading edge of fire that was just blasting across Pandora. And as you see, one of the original artworks, I think, for that sequence was by Dylan Cole. Dylan Cole and Ben Proctor are two of like the keystone artists that were doing like paintings, like concept art beforehand. And so I think it was a Dylan painting. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was Dylan Cole. He had done this amazing painting of like dire horses running, and there's this wall of fire behind them, and they're like there's no chance that they're surviving. And so I think that was such an inspiration for this sequence. And so I think like coming in the first couple days of production, you're just trying to be a sponge and soak in as much information as you possibly can as fast as you can. So I was just like tapping through all the production artwork and trying to really understand what we were in for, and just like getting into some of those sequences and seeing like the concept art for it. I was like, holy shit, we're like in for a serious ride from like the first or second scene of the movie. So that was super inspiring, and I think like just seeing the way that their production worked was super cool, and I think it just drove everybody to work that much harder. So I can kind of take a pause there so you guys can speak.
Thank you, Matt.
I don't know if that answered anything, but
I don't know if it did either, but I loved every second of it, so.
It was great. This is the content that's more interesting than just us talking about movie.
Yeah, now we have like a genuinely fascinating technical insight into the movie. Not a lot of videos online will have this. This will be like one of the first almost BTS things about Avatar 2 out there.
Kate Winslet holding her breath.
I always thought it was so funny because like I've been, lips sealed for years about this production, just waiting for the day to see like a single frame from this production, like just a tiny little morsel, because even when I left, everything was still such a work in progress. Like I had read the whole script for 2 and 3 and maybe part of 4, but a lot of the capture had been done, but shots were still being stitched together. Everything was still kind of in pieces. None of the final rendering was done. There were some like early look dev tests for the characters and for the world, but like everything was still very rough. And so I was just waiting for so long. And then finally, like pretty recently, I feel like they dropped the teaser trailer, which blew my head off.
Yeah.
Because I had heard grumblings from friends who had worked on the production, like, oh, it's looking crazy, things are going well. But seeing that opening shot, I think the teaser trailer, the first shot, if I remember correctly, it was kind of like a top-down shot of,
yeah, like jumping through the trees, I think.
and you see like the tulkuns, or like I forget what the name of the shark creature was, but just like the reef creatures like swimming around, and like you could see into like that blue water, just like sparkling blue water, and I was like, holy shit, this is just on another level.
Let's talk about what we think about this movie. Matt, you worked on this movie. You told me how excited you were to finally see this come to fruition. What's it like finally seeing it, I guess 5 years after you worked on it, finally seeing it come to fruition? And what did you like the movie? I mean, come on, give it at me.
I was actually really impressed with the final product. For a long time, it was kind of like this dance of like, trying to remember all the things that happened in production, trying to remember all the script reads from like ages ago. Because you can't basically when you're reading the script, you go into like a room, you give them your phone, they take all of your stuff, you have to be like more or less naked, and then they hand you a script which has like a number on it. It's like script number 1. They literally unlock it from like a safe, like a gigantic safe. No joke. I went in, I had a scheduled time to read through the scripts for 2 and 3. They put you in like a little room. They open up the safe, like you can see them like, okay, dial this way, dial that way, open up. And like it's like so laughable because they open the safe, it's like 3 stacks of paper in there. It's not like gold coins and precious gems. It's like in a safe that you could put like a human body in, basically. And so they then put you into the script reading room, which I was not really allowed to, I couldn't take pictures of it. I couldn't do anything. It was really like, you can have a notepad in there and like jot down. There are very specific rules. They have to like approve whatever you've written. So you can't like rewrite whole pages of the script. You can kind of like jot down a general idea of like a suggestion of what happened on a page if it's relevant to your sequence. But it was like this very bizarre experience that was very unlike any production experience that I had had. Like trying to just hold on to all that precious information over those like few years while I was waiting for the film to come out was challenging. I was like, wait a second, was it this sequence that happened, or was that from the next movie? You know, it was kind of like going back and forth in my head where like you kind of twist the details a little bit. But I think I was able to maintain like a pretty solid grasp of the plot over those 4 or so years since I left the production until it came out. But yeah, I was really happy with the final product, like I said. And I think the biggest thing was like, because it was such a unique production, I was really curious, like, from the scenes that I worked on, what made it into the final film, what got changed, what looked the same. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of the sequences that I had been heavily involved with stayed very similar to what we had kind of shot early on and planned from kind of day one when I was on it.
And then they took all your work out in comp. They took the opacity slider and just zero.
Yeah, every layer that Matt specifically worked on, they went, we're deleting this layer.
Well, there's no guarantee. I mean, we joke about it, but I mean, that can happen. Like and it might not be your fault either. It's not out of the question for me to go to a movie that I've worked on like a year or two before and see that like a whole sequence that I was excited to see finish isn't even in the film anymore. So it was kind of nice to see those like handful of kind of pinnacle role defining moments make it to the big screen finally, which was pretty dope.
All right, Matt, time to put the heat on. Tell me the plot of Avatar 3. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. I think James Cameron would personally shoot you if you even said anything.
Yeah, he would personally shoot you too.
All of us would die. We would all be dead and Disney would cover it up.
What is it? James Cameron has the power. Guillermo del Toro's dad was kidnapped in the 90s and James Cameron got him back. It was $1 million ransom and James Cameron drove Guillermo del Toro to the bank, snatched up $1 million, got a hostage negotiator, and got Guillermo's dad back. Cameron has the power to kill every last one of us.
Yeah, he knows people.
He is people.
He's gonna do it with his cell phone nail gun.
Matt, your portfolio, it had a picture of the Cove of the Ancestors before the teaser came out. That was amazing.
I mean, I think that still had been released. I think it was one of the first stills that they released, but it was also one of the first pieces of concept art that I saw when I first joined the production. And there are a couple of those that I have in mind for like films 3 and 4 that are just like in your face, like amazing, like just like the most iconic looking sequences that I'm really excited for people to eventually get to see.
Yeah. Obviously, you can't go into any specifics, but can you promise us that the next movies are going to blow our minds still visually?
Yeah. If this one blew your mind, then 3 will for sure blow your mind because we shot them both at the same time. Like some days I would go into the studio and we would be shooting scenes from 3 and some we would be shooting scenes from 2. It was almost like one gigantic production that just got chopped in half. I mean, there is like a 3-act script for all of the films, but it was shot as kind of like this gargantuan production. And then 4 will be shot separately after that.
The next 6 years belong to Avatar, gentlemen. All right.
Sorry, I'm not sure about that.
Did I ask you?
How about that Tulkun hunt?
Yo, God.
The methodology was fascinating, even though they were bad guys. Like, the coordinated way they took down that whale was interesting, but I hate them for it.
And then you're also, like, up there in the bridge with, like, Jermaine Clement and Jack Champion, Spider. Well, first of all, you wouldn't believe when that kid joined the production. Trinity Bliss was, she played Took, the youngest daughter. And then I remember when they first came in, like they were so young. Trinity was like this little munchkin, and she was like in a mocap. So she probably like doubled in size from the time that they started shooting until it was done. But Jack was kind of like, I think his like big selling point with casting was that he was like an expert parkour kid. Like he came from like the parkour world, and so he was just like a monkey on the jungle gym. Like we'd be like sitting there kind of in the crow's nest in our office, like looking down through the glass window, and you just see him like swinging from like set piece to set piece, like all of that parkour shit that they do through like the Pandoran jungle and everything. That's all them. None of that is really like, I mean, obviously if they jump off a cliff or something, they're jumping onto a pad, and in animation or motion edit, they're fixing the tail end of it. But so much of that stuff was shot like in camera, which was super impressive. It was really cool to see like such a young cast come on and really like embrace the technology and just like walk onto set and be like, it, let's do it. Like, let's shoot it now. I was really impressed by that. And also, you know, the returning cast was so friendly. Like Stephen Lang, who plays Quaritch, was just like the nicest guy. I used to have breakfast with him at the cafe. Like, so what happened was I started coming in to beat the traffic I would get in at like 8 o'clock, some downtime to like eat breakfast before call time at like 9 a.m. And he was just getting out of his workouts every day. He was going to the gym. Like he used the gym at the studio, I think. So he'd just be like emerging from his workouts at 8, and he would go and get like breakfast at the cafe, which was right next to the gym. And so like every day I would be like just walking in at the same time as him, and there's like no one else around. That early in the morning, it's pretty quiet. There's like a few people kind of coming and going, but that was kind of before like the heavy production started going when call times were earlier. So their call time wasn't until a bit later. So I would walk in, he would walk in, and like after like a couple days in a row of just like standing there awkwardly, like you don't want to like fanboy over the talent, because like you have to maintain a certain level of like professionalism on set, right, or around set. I think I sat down and he was like, anyone sitting here? I was like, no. No one's sitting there, just you, Quaritch. Just don't kill me.
All right, final thoughts on Avatar Perfect Blue yourself.
3 words: just go watch.
Yeah! Studio approved.
Matt, thanks again for coming on. Do you have anything you want to plug real quick? I'm sorry, I forgot to do that.
Other than the movie we're talking about, of course.
I mean, I want to plug you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me on. I guess I could plug Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish, which is coming out next week. That was actually one of the more recent productions that I just wrapped up on. I've been kind of monitoring the Rotten Tomatoes situation, and it seems like people are really loving it, so that's exciting to see. So we'll see how that shakes out once the official release happens, but so far so good.
Whenever Matt works on a movie, it's gold. I saw The Bad Guys earlier this year, and it was a really fun movie. I saw it with my sister, and when the credits rolled, I got to point to Matt's name and be like, I know that guy.
This is why we're here. Unobtainium.
Just slid my ticket across the table and I said, sorry guys, I gotta see about a girl.